Welcome to the Paul Craig Roberts podcast. You can find it at paulcraigroberts.net. This is your host, Søren Korsgaard. Craig, it would appear that tensions are on the rise. 2 days ago, there was an attempt to assassinate former President Trump. 4 days ago, it was reported that the Russian government had planned to assassinate the CEO of a powerful German arms manufacturer that had been producing artillery shells for Ukraine. And back in May, there was an attempt to assassinate Prime Minister Robert Fico of Slovakia. Are we living in dangerous times?
Obviously, for politicians who get out of step with official explanations, they're the ones who tend to be assassinated. There have also been attempts on Putin, and there have been attempts on Elon Musk. Elon Musk reports there have been 2 attempts on his life.
That was not widely reported, was it?
The Western press doesn't report many things. They have to fit the official explanation in order to be reported. But Musk reported it. Elon Musk reported it on X. But of course, CNN and the New York Times and that bunch did not report it.
Immediately after the attempted assassination, there was also what appeared to be an attempt by the mainstream media, such as the New York Times and CNN, to downplay the events. What do you make of that?
Yes, there was an immediate response was not to report an assassination. They made as if Trump was like Biden and stumbled and fell. And of course, this couldn't last long. There were too many videos of his bleeding ear and the blood running across his face and the Secret Service people and then Trump raising his fist and saying, "Fight, fight, fight." That's an iconic photograph that will get him elected.
That photo is worth millions of votes.
Yes, and the left wing is accusing him of staging it in order to get the photo. But of course, not only did he get shot, 3 other people did. One of them is dead, and the other 2 are in critical condition.
Does that include the shooter?
No, that's the people who were behind Trump. So the bullets that missed Trump killed 1 person and I think caused head injuries to 2 others. So it was a serious thing, and there were casualties of 3 other people in addition to the shooter.
That leads to your article that you just published. I think it was yesterday. Did we witness the FBI's attempt on Trump's life? And you present 3 hypotheses for these egregious failures, namely incompetence, intent, and insufficient assigned resources to account for what we observed. So why don't we start with the incompetence theory or hypothesis? Yesterday in the Danish media, the former head of the Danish Security Intelligence Services, he said that it was really strange, the type of mistakes that were made that made the assassination attempt possible. And he pointed out this was a simple and easy area to secure. Although eyewitnesses attempted to alert the police to a man with a rifle, the Secret Service, including the snipers on the rooftop of the adjacent building, did apparently not see him.
Yes, there are many strange things about it. And the role that incompetence might have played is that the main feature of the Biden regime has been to pursue inclusion, diversity. And so the recruitment standards for all federal agencies, including the Secret Service and the military, have been lowered in order to be more inclusive and more diverse. So we know this is a fact because Biden has done it everywhere. We also know it because the Secret Service itself has protested this. Secret Service agents signed a petition, and they complained that their job was too important to take any risk with merit and ability in the interest of diversity or inclusion. They said, this doesn't mean that diverse people aren't competent, but if they're hired for diverse reasons, not for competence, that makes a big difference. And so they have complained about the recruitment practices. The United States military is going through the same thing. They don't promote qualified people in order to be able to be more diverse. So that's entirely a possible explanation that the recruitment of the agents has suffered in order to be more diverse, more inclusive, and this affected performance. That's one explanation. But we have to understand just how bad the failures were. The worst one is that the nearby buildings were not secured, which is really a puzzle. And right now, since this has become an issue, the Secret Service is blaming the local police. The Secret Service commander said it was the responsibility of the local police to secure those buildings. Well, that's suspicious because the Secret Service has the responsibility. The local police are usually used as adjuncts under the Secret Service direction. But let's suppose he's right and the local police were supposed to secure them. Why didn't the Secret Service check and see if they were secured? This is a real failure. And to see the Secret Service trying to pass their own responsibility off to the local police, this is a puzzle.
It certainly is. Another puzzle is why the snipers didn't see him. Apparently he was on the rooftop for about 150 seconds. That was reported earlier. Maybe that estimate will be revised, but the sniper appears to have been on the rooftop for a significant amount of time. How in the world is that possible? Were they not looking?
It's very strange. Once he finished firing, they instantly shot him. So obviously they could see him. And obviously people on the ground were calling the attention of the police and the Secret Service to the man with the rifle on the building. They were standing there pointing at him. A couple of them went twice to the police and say, there's an armed man on the building. Nothing was done.
Unbelievable.
In other words, it looks like something more than incompetence. It's hard to blame these kinds of mistakes on too much diversity, not enough competence.
We know that this incompetence theory has been used in the past for, say, for example, 9/11, which was blamed on a failure of imagination.
Yeah. I think that it's dicey to say, well, this was just incompetence. Now, one of my other explanations is they refuse to allocate enough Secret Service resources. It is a known fact that the Trump campaign has been pressuring the Department of Homeland Security, which has responsibility for Secret Service, to provide more protection and has been steadfastly refused. The Director of Homeland Security has refused to provide additional protection, and it may be there just wasn't enough Secret Service agents on the scene. We know also that the Department of Homeland Security has refused to provide any security to the other presidential candidate, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who is trying to get the Democrat nomination for president away from Biden. He's been on the campaign trail, and as far as I know, has never been provided any security by the Secret Service. I do know he was originally rejected having any security. Well, this is unprecedented. This has never happened before, that there's a security problem for presidential candidates. So it's entirely possible that there just wasn't enough Secret Service agents in the area.
So possibly a combination of incompetence and insufficient assigned resources. So that might account for it. But there's also a third possibility, of course, which is intent. They let it happen.
They let it happen. There was a stand down. And one of the points in favor of it being a stand down is, why would the shooter have the expectation that the buildings wouldn't be occupied? How could he have the expectation that he could climb with a rifle up on a building and not encounter the Secret Service there on the building where they should have been? So it's almost as if he knew the buildings would not be secured. You know, normally somebody who's going to try to assassinate a president has to take into account the likely behavior of the protective services, the Secret Service. They have a big envelope of protection that they put around. So why was this void there? And how did the shooter know there was no security there, and that he could access the building with a rifle, not be accosted? He can crawl along the building with a rifle, get in position with a rifle, and not be accosted. It's hard to believe they didn't see him, because as soon as he fired, they shot him. It's almost like they waited until he shot at Trump, and then they killed him. Well, why didn't they kill him early? You see, people don't like to ask these kinds of questions because it implies a conspiracy against Trump by the government or by Biden or by whatever. But these are real questions. They need an answer. It's highly unusual that an assassin could be in public with a rifle and on a building that's supposed to be secured, and nothing happened. So, and we also know, of course, that the establishment hates Trump. The FBI hates him. The FBI spent 8 years trying to destroy him. The FBI, which is part of the Justice Department, that's the agency that brought all of the indictments against the Trump supporters that they say were insurrectionists. They have 1,000 Trump supporters in prison simply because they went to a rally. They're completely misrepresented in the charges against them.
So we both have some circumstantial evidence consistent with intent, but we also have a possible motive.
That's right. And the motive is that Trump has presented himself as a direct challenge to the ruling establishment. And of course, the security agencies, the military security complex, they are a powerful element in the ruling establishment. And he has challenged this establishment. He says, I'm taking the power away from you and I'm giving it back to the people. Well, no one's ever said this before. This is the first time. And so his challenge to the establishment makes him a threat. And they can see that Biden, after his recent performances, public performances, and the polls that show that even the Democrats don't want him to be president.
Do you think Biden will step down?
He'll be removed. You see, he hasn't been nominated. He's assuming that since he's the president, he'll be renominated, but he hasn't been. I think when does that happen? August the 7th, I think, is when the Democratic convention is. Well, they haven't much time. They don't really have a candidate.
Can you elaborate on some of the ways that Trump has apparently challenged the establishment?
The biggest way, what caused him the outbreak of all the trouble he's had, was when he said he was going to normalize relations with Russia, because that was a direct threat to the power of the CIA, the National Security Administration, the FBI, the Homeland Security. It was a direct attack on the profits of the armaments industry. They said, we need these enemies. He's going to take the enemies away from us. So how do we justify our budgets and all our power and our assassinations all over the world? And so you have to remember the first charge brought against Trump was brought by the CIA director, who declared him to be a traitor to America.
If that is the case, why did the Trump administration pull out of the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty?
Well, he did that later, and I think he's trying to recover from the huge number of constant attacks. I mean, just think about all the attacks on him. You know, there was Russiagate. There were 2 impeachments. There was a Documents Gate, the alleged charge that he had national security documents he wasn't supposed to have. There was all the stuff about the porn star. And then they made an issue of the rally for Trump on January the 6th. And they said this is an insurrection. Well, we finally got all the videos released from the House of Representatives, and they showed no insurrection at all. The police opened the door, escorted the people around the Capitol, and they all left peacefully. The whole thing is a hoax. Well, if all of this is hitting you every day, a new charge, and plus they started making charges about his New York businesses. These were New York state charges they were making. You can't get anything done. You can't, if you have an agenda, you can't deal with anything. So you can see why into his years as president, he tried to say, well, look, I'm tough on Russia, just to quieten it down. In fact, I think that's why he started picking on China. He was trying to show that he was tough, and he was for the military and the security, and just to get them off his back long enough that he could try to get something of his agenda done. So
what remains clear is that the military-industrial complex needs an enemy to justify its enormous expenditures. When anyone gets in its way, it will crush the opposition. Perhaps the military-industrial complex perceives Trump as an enemy of his unilateral power. And just to pull out some figures, back in April, the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute published an overview of military expenditures for 2023. And they found that it had increased for the 9th consecutive year, reaching a total of $2.4 trillion. Topping the list, no surprise, was the United States, having spent $916 billion in a single year on the military. Coming in number 2 was China at $296 and Russia at $109 billion. And then number 4 on the list was India and then Saudi Arabia.
Well, I think what happens in the United States is that the military security complex has had a free rein for so long that the expense comes from constant cost overruns, because the cost overruns never stop the project. So they start something and it's going to cost $10 and it ends up costing $1,000. And I think the main difference is the prices here get so inflated by the fact that they know they're not going to be held accountable to their estimates. So the cost overruns are a way of life. You know, I think as well as I remember the F-35 fighter jet, these things were at some point costing like $50 billion a piece, some outrageous sum. You know, you couldn't afford to put them in combat because losing one was, I'm not sure, but that it was $50 billion. It was some huge price on a single fighter plane. This is because of the endless cost overruns.
Let's shift gears for a moment, Craig, and consider Trump's possible response to the attempted assassination. How might he react, for example, if he concludes that it was a conspiracy by the establishment to take him out?
Well, if he comes to the conclusion that it was an actual attack on his life from the establishment, he will feel very insecure with his Secret Service protection. So I don't know what would happen, probably a complete reorganization of the Secret Service. Trump is a fighter. If he wasn't a fighter, this may simply tame him and make him then amenable to the establishment so that he can stay alive. He could just treat his reelection as vindication. And so he doesn't have to do anything. He's now vindicated. I think for sure Trump will see it as a consequence of the hatred generated toward him by the media, the movie stars, and the Democrats, and the left wing in elections. He'll see this as their fault. So if this guy who shot at him is deranged, he will attribute that deranged and that rage to all of the 8 years of demonization of Trump. So clearly, he'll see the liberal left in the United States as responsible. So that will have an effect, whether or not he thinks it was an actual state attempt on his life. I suspect it'll make him much more careful about who he appoints, that he'll try to find fighters like himself who will stand by him and use the power of their office to clean out the swamp, assuming it can be done at all. And so it could have good things. It's hard to know. We'll just have to wait to see. I did notice that Trump said that this attack on him shows the country is too divided and that it's got to be unified, and he was going to unify it. Well, if he's going to unify it and they hate him, it means he's not going to be able to clean them out. So we'll just have to see. Not everybody is up to the kind of challenge that Trump's had for 8 years, and which he will have now if he wins. It's going to be a big challenge. He's never going to be safe. He tries to unify the country when half the country hates the other half. It's not quite clear how you do that. If he closes the border, the Democrats are going to be enraged. If he stops legitimizing sexual perversion, they're going to be enraged. The intellectuals, the movie star, everybody. If he tries to stop the teaching in the schools that white people are racist, the liberals and the left are going to be enraged. So how is he going to unify the country? If he doesn't do any of these things, his supporters are going to be enraged. So the question really is the country too split to be unified? I think it is. And that what he has to do is reconstruct a country. The United States has to be reconstructed. It's beyond unification. And so the powers that be and the forces responsible for this have got to be moved aside. And that, of course, requires a real fight. And it's hard to unify when you're fighting.
This concludes this week's episode. Consider subscribing on paulcraigroberts.net to stay updated.